He didn't even look at me when he ordered. The waiter stood there, pen hovering, waiting for my choice, but this man, a stranger I'd met less than 30 minutes earlier, leaned back in his chair and said, "She'll have the salmon, medium, and a glass of the Pinot." No question, no pause, no glance in my direction. I remember the sound of the restaurant around us, forks clinking, low laughter, the hum of New York doing what it always does, while something in me went very still. I could have corrected him. I could have smiled and said, "Actually," but I didn't. I let him finish. Because sometimes the saddest moments don't come from what people do wrong. They come from what they do without noticing you at all. If you've ever sat across from someone and felt invisible in plain sight, subscribe for more real stories about modern dating, boundaries, and the quiet moments that change everything. New York has a way of making blind dates feel smaller than they already are. You don't dress up too much because you've learned better. You don't tell your friends you're excited because you don't want to jinx it. You just say, "I'm grabbing a drink," like it's nothing. That's what I told myself as I walked into the wine bar on the Lower East Side. Brick walls, low lighting, tables packed just close enough that you could hear other people's conversations if you tried not to. I got there 5 minutes early. That's just how I am. I chose a table near the window, set my phone face down, and ordered water, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I didn't want anything to rush me. Not the night, not him, not myself. He walked in exactly on time. Tall, clean jacket, confident stride. The kind of man who looked like he belonged anywhere he stood, which in New York people usually take as a good sign. He smiled when he saw me. A quick, practiced smile. Not warm, not cold, just efficient. "You must be her," he said, reaching for a handshake before switching it to a half hug at the last second. Already adjusting, already deciding. We sat down. The conversation started easy enough. Jobs, neighborhoods, the usual New York small talk. He talked about Brooklyn like he'd conquered it, about his work like it impressed people more than it actually did, about dating apps like he was tired of them but still very much enjoying the game. I nodded. I listened. I smiled when it made sense. At some point, he asked what I did, but before I could finish my sentence, he interrupted, not rudely, just confidently, and said, "Oh yeah, that makes sense for you." For me, I let it go. That's something you learn after 40. You don't jump at every small thing anymore. You collect patterns. The waiter came by to take our drink order. He ordered his immediately. Didn't ask what I wanted, but looked at me like I expected me to jump in. I said, "Pinot is fine." He smiled like I'd passed a test. The wine came. The lights felt lower. The table felt smaller. He leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms just slightly, like he was settling into ownership of the space, of the night. I watched his hands as he talked, how relaxed they were, how certain. And I remember thinking something I hadn't thought in a long time. This isn't going to end well. Not because he was cruel, not because he was loud, but because there was already no room for me, and he hadn't even noticed. And that was before the waiter came back to take our food order. In New York, confidence gets rewarded the way kindness used to. People don't ask if you're thoughtful. They ask if you lead, if you know what you want. And when a man walks into a room like he owns the air, someone always calls it attractive. That's what he had. Calm certainty that makes other people relax, because it means they don't have to think. "So I usually do dates like this," he said, swirling his wine. "Low-key spot, no pressure. You can tell a lot about someone in the first 15 minutes. I smiled, because that's what you do when you're trying to keep things civil. But inside, my stomach tightened. 15 minutes, like I was a resume. I told him I lived on the Upper West Side, and he nodded like he'd already pictured my whole life. "Yeah, that tracks. You seem like an Upper West Side woman." It wasn't a compliment. It was a label, a box, and I knew that box was more important to him than the actual person sitting across the table. He kept talking. Work, gym, his crazy schedule, the places he usually eats. He dropped restaurant names like references could make him taste better. Whenever I spoke, he filled the pauses fast, like silence was dangerous, like my thoughts needed to be edited before they landed. I tried to tell a small story, something harmless, about a guy on the subway offering me his seat like it was a grand romantic gesture, and he cut in halfway through. "See, that's what I mean. Men in this city are either too much or not enough. You gotta train people how to treat you." Train. My chest tightened. It sounded smart until you realize it's just control dressed up as advice. He leaned forward a little, lowering his voice, like we were sharing something intimate. "I'm big on traditional stuff," he said. "I like to lead. Women like that. They want a man who takes charge." He said it like he was doing women a favor. And maybe some women do. Maybe in some seasons of life, you want someone else to hold the wheel. But I wasn't in that season anymore. I'd spent too many years being easy to manage, agreeable, low maintenance, the woman who smiles so nobody feels uncomfortable. I didn't want a man who took charge. I wanted a man who noticed me.
The saddest part was that he wasn't trying to hurt me. He wasn't yelling or being openly cruel. He was just comfortable. Comfortable assuming, comfortable deciding, comfortable enjoying the sound of his own certainty. And I could feel that old familiar feeling creeping in, the one I hate admitting I still recognize, that tiny ache of trying to earn space. Then the waiter came back. He didn't look at me first. He looked at him, and my date sat up just slightly, like this was his moment. That's when I realized the ordering wasn't going to be an accident. It was going to be a demonstration. And the worst part, a small part of me already knew exactly what I was going to do.
The waiter stood there, polite smile, pen ready. He waited. There was a half second where the space between us felt open, where the choice could have been mine. But my date didn't notice that space, or maybe he did and stepped into it on purpose. So, he said, not looking at me, she'll probably want something light. Probably. He glanced at the menu, then back at the waiter, already nodding to himself. She's not a big steak person. Salmon's safe, or the chicken, but salmon's better here. I watched him say it like he'd known me longer than 45 minutes. I thought about interrupting. The word actually hovered at the back of my throat, ready to come out soft, polite, harmless, but I stopped myself. Because this wasn't about fish, it was about listening. He kept going, explaining his logic, protein, balance, how late it was, how heavy food messes with sleep. He said it like he was sharing wisdom, not making decisions for someone else. The waiter nodded, used to this. New York trains you not to react. I glanced down at the table, at my hands folded together, my nails freshly done, the glass of wine untouched now. I realized I was holding myself still, like if I didn't move, the moment would pass. "He'll like it," he said, finally, confident, settled. The waiter turned toward me just slightly, eyes asking a quiet question he wasn't allowed to voice. I looked at him, then back at my date. And I did the thing women learn how to do very early in life. I smiled. "That's fine," I said, calm, neutral, easy. My date smiled wider, like we were in sync, like he'd just saved us time. The waiter walked away. And something inside me sank, not dramatically, not loudly, just a slow, familiar drop, the kind that doesn't hurt right away, but you feel it later when you're alone. He picked up his wine again, completely relaxed now. "Trust me," he said, "I'm good at this stuff." Good at what? Dates? Women? Control? I took a sip of my wine, the taste sharper than before. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I felt tired. Tired of moments like this being so small that if you explain them, people think you're overreacting. Tired of knowing that if I said something now, I'd be labeled difficult, sensitive, or worse, dramatic. So I stayed quiet. I listened to him talk about a trip he took last year, about how he planned everything, about how people appreciated that he took the pressure off. I wondered if anyone ever asked him whether they wanted the pressure taken off, or if they just adapted. Across the room, a couple laughed loudly. Somewhere behind us, someone dropped a fork. The city kept moving, indifferent. And I thought about how often women are taught that peace means silence. I realized then that this date wasn't going badly. It was going exactly how it was supposed to. For him. The food came faster than I expected. Plates slid onto the table with practiced precision, the waiter setting mine down first this time, like he was trying to correct something without saying it out loud. Salmon, exactly how he'd ordered it. It looked fine, perfectly cooked, lemon on the side, clean, balanced, reasonable. Everything a man like him would choose for a woman he barely knew. He watched my reaction closely, waiting for approval. "See?" he said. "Told you, they do it right here." I nodded again, took another sip of wine. The chair felt harder now, or maybe I was just more aware of my body in it, how upright I was sitting, how contained. He dug into his food immediately, talking between bites, something about work stress, something about a client who didn't know what they needed until he showed them. There it was again, that wordless assumption that other people exist slightly behind him, waiting to be guided. I cut into the salmon, the knife gliding easily. It tasted good. That almost made it worse, because if it had been bad, I could have joked. I could have used it as an opening, but it wasn't bad. It was just not chosen by me. He noticed I was quieter and leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You okay?" he asked. "You got quiet." I looked at him for a second, longer than necessary. "Yeah," I said, "just listening." He smiled, relieved. "I like that," he said. "A lot of women feel like they have to fill every second. Silence is underrated." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because he had no idea how hard-earned my silence was.
The conversation drifted to relationships, past ones, what worked, what didn't. He spoke like a man who had been forgiven often. I think chemistry's overrated, he said. Compatibility is what matters. If two people know their roles, things are easier. Roles. I chewed slowly, each bite deliberate now. And what role do you think I play? I asked, keeping my tone light. He shrugged, like the answer was obvious. You seem adaptable. That's a good thing. Adaptable. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not sharp, not explosive, just heavy, like hearing a truth you didn't ask for. I thought about all the times I'd been praised for that exact word, how often adaptable really meant easy to shape. He reached for the check before I was halfway done eating, not paying yet, just touching it, claiming it. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because I'd already decided something else. The sadness crept in quietly then. Not sadness about him, sadness about how familiar this felt, about how many women I knew who would stay, who would explain, who would try to teach. I took another bite of the salmon, suddenly aware that I didn't taste it anymore. I was already somewhere else, watching the night from the outside, waiting for the right moment to stand up.
By the time I realized I wasn't hungry anymore, half the plate was still full. The food sat there between us like proof, not of anything dramatic, just of a moment that had already passed and couldn't be undone. He kept talking, completely at ease now, like the night had settled into a rhythm he recognized. I usually know what works, he said casually, wiping his mouth with the napkin. People appreciate decisiveness, especially on dates. Takes the awkwardness out of it. I nodded, slowly. Awkwardness. That wasn't the word I would have chosen. The truth was, nothing about the night felt awkward to him. That was the problem. He was comfortable because nothing challenged him. Nothing asked him to adjust, to pause, to wonder if he'd crossed a line. I watched the way he leaned back again, shoulders loose, one arm resting along the back of his chair like he belonged there, like the table, the space, the evening, like all of it had quietly aligned around him. I remembered being younger, sitting across from men like this, wondering if I was the one doing something wrong, if maybe I just didn't know how to relax, if maybe I should be grateful someone was willing to take the lead. That thought didn't come this time. Instead, I felt something colder, clearer. He asked if I wanted another glass of wine, already gesturing to the waiter before I could answer. "I'm good," I said gently. "I think I'll stick with water." He hesitated for half a second, just enough to register surprise. Then he smiled again. "Sure," he said, "hydration's important." Like I needed permission. The waiter walked away, and the table fell into a brief silence. Not the kind he praised earlier, the kind that exposes things. I realized I was sad. Not heartbroken, not wounded, just quietly disappointed in a way that felt older than this date, older than him. Sad that something so small could tell me so much. Sad that he would probably go home tonight thinking it went well. Sad that he would never know why it didn't. I looked at him then, not critically, not angrily, just honestly. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't even unkind. He was simply a man who moved through the world assuming it would make room for him, and most of the time it did. I set my fork down carefully and folded my napkin, placing it on the edge of the plate. A small gesture, almost invisible. He didn't notice. And in that moment, I knew I wouldn't be explaining anything tonight. I wouldn't be correcting him or helping him grow or offering feedback like some exit survey. I'd already given enough of myself to moments like this. I took a breath, steady and quiet, and waited, not for the check, not for the waiter, but for the right moment to choose myself. People always assume silence means fear, that if a woman doesn't speak up right away, it's because she's intimidated, unsure, shrinking, that staying quiet is weakness. But sitting there across from him, I knew that wasn't true. Not for me, not anymore. Silence can also be a decision. I stayed quiet because I was listening, not just to his words, but to the rhythm of him, to what happened when he wasn't being challenged, to how he moved when he believed everything was going well. He kept talking, filling the space easily. Stories about work, about a promotion he deserved but hadn't gotten yet, about an ex who didn't really know what she wanted, about how dating in New York had become exhausting because people overthink everything. I nodded at the right moments. I asked small, neutral questions. I let him feel interesting. And the more comfortable he got, the clearer everything became. He didn't ask how the salmon was. He didn't ask if I was enjoying myself. He didn't notice I'd stopped drinking my wine. Instead, he explained things, life, relationships, women, as if clarity came from volume.
I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to make moments like this work, softening my edges, translating discomfort into patience, giving men the benefit of the doubt long past the point where it was deserved. Tonight, I wasn't doing that. I wasn't testing him. I wasn't punishing him. I was observing. There's a strange sadness that comes with that kind of clarity, because once you see a pattern clearly, you can't unsee it. You can't talk yourself back into hope. He leaned forward again, lowering his voice like we were sharing something meaningful. "You're easy to be with," he said. "That's rare." Easy. I felt it land exactly where it always does, right between compliment and dismissal. I smiled, small and polite. "Thanks," I said. Inside, something closed. Not dramatically, not angrily, just enough to protect me. I realized then that my silence wasn't about giving him space. It was about giving myself permission to stop trying. I wasn't going to convince him of anything. I wasn't going to teach him how to see me. I wasn't going to ask for curiosity from someone who hadn't offered it once. The city hummed outside the window. Taxis passed. People walked by with places to be. Lives unfolding without this table, without this moment. And for the first time all night, I felt grounded. Quietly, calmly, I understood something that took me years to learn. You don't owe everyone an explanation. Sometimes silence is simply the sound of choosing yourself.
After that realization settled in, the night changed its texture. Not for him, for me. He kept talking the same way, steady, confident, convinced the connection was still building. But I wasn't leaning in anymore. I wasn't anticipating his next sentence. I was listening from a distance now, like you do when you already know how something ends. He told a story about a date he once walked on because she asked too many questions. He laughed when he said it, shaking his head like it was an obvious deal breaker. "I mean, relax," he said. "You don't have to analyze everything." I watched his mouth as he spoke, the ease with which the words came out, the certainty, the comfort of being unexamined. "That makes sense," I said evenly. It didn't, but I wasn't here to debate him. The waiter came by to clear the plates. Mine was still half full. He didn't comment on it. Neither did my date. The plate disappeared like evidence no one needed. He shifted closer in his chair, lowering his voice again. "So," he said, smiling, "what are you looking for, really?" It was the first real question he'd asked all night. I considered answering honestly, about wanting mutual curiosity, about wanting to feel seen, about how I was tired of being adaptable and ready for something quieter and truer. But I knew better. I said, "I think I'm looking for alignment." He nodded immediately, too quickly. "Exactly," he said. "That's what I'm saying. When roles are clear, everything flows." There it was again, that word, roles. I realized then that even when he asked questions, he wasn't listening for answers. He was listening for confirmation. The sadness deepened. Not sharp, not dramatic, just heavy in a way that made my chest feel tight. Because I could see how this would go if I stayed, how many conversations would sound like this, how often I'd be praised for being easy while slowly disappearing. He reached for the check again, fingers resting on it. "I had a good time," he said. "We should do this again." He said it like a statement, not an invitation. I looked at him for a long moment, really looked, at the confidence everyone compliments, at the comfort that leaves no room for curiosity, at the man who wasn't cruel, but wasn't capable of seeing past himself either. "I'm glad we met," I said honestly. He smiled, satisfied. "I knew you'd be," he said. That was when I felt it fully. Not anger, not heartbreak, just a quiet grief for something I wasn't willing to lose again. There's a moment in some conversations when everything goes quiet inside you. Not awkward quiet, not uncomfortable quiet, clear quiet. That's what I felt when he said, "I knew you'd be." I didn't correct him. I didn't smile wider. I didn't explain myself. I just felt done. Not done with dating, not done with men, not even done with him specifically. I was done with the internal negotiation, the part of me that used to ask, should I give this more time? Am I being too harsh? Maybe I'm overthinking it. That voice didn't show up tonight. Instead, there was something steadier, older, wiser. I looked around the restaurant, the warm lights, the crowded tables, the couples leaning into each other like gravity still worked for them. Somewhere near the bar, a woman laughed too loud, the way you do when you're trying to convince yourself you're having fun. I'd been that woman. He was still talking, explaining why second dates usually work better for him. Less pressure, he said. People relax once they know what to expect. I realized I didn't want to relax around him. I wanted to be awake. He checked his watch casually, like time bent around his schedule. He said, "I've got an early morning, but this was worth it." Worth it. I felt that familiar urge to soften the moment, to make it easy, pleasant, forgettable, to leave things light so no one felt uncomfortable. I didn't do that either. Instead, I reached for my bag slowly, deliberately, and placed it on my lap. The move
movement was small, but it shifted something in the space between us. He noticed. "You good?" he asked, eyebrows lifting slightly. "Yes," I said, and this time it was fully true. The sadness was still there, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, resolute, like the last wave after a storm. I understood something then that I wish I'd learned sooner. You don't always need a breaking point to walk away. Sometimes clarity is enough. I wasn't leaving because he ordered for me. I wasn't leaving because of the words he used or the way he spoke. I was leaving because I'd seen the pattern, and I respected myself enough not to wait for it to get worse. I looked at him, steady and kind. "I think I'm gonna head out," I said. He blinked, surprised, just for a moment. "Oh," he said, "already?" "Yeah, I think so." And for the first time all night, I felt completely aligned with myself. He hesitated for a second, like his brain was trying to catch up with the moment. "Everything okay?" he asked, lowering his voice again, instinctively trying to pull the situation back under control. Did I say something? I shook my head gently, not dismissive, not cold, just final. "No," I said, "you didn't do anything wrong." That seemed to confuse him more than anger would have, because people know how to respond to conflict. They don't know what to do when you opt out calmly. He glanced at the table, then back at me. "I thought we were having a good time," he said, not defensive, genuinely puzzled. "We were," I answered, and I meant it. "I just don't think we're aligned." There it was, the word again, alignment. But this time I wasn't offering it as a concept, I was living it. He leaned back, exhaled through his nose, half smiling like this was a misunderstanding that could still be negotiated. "Well," he said, "first dates can be weird. You can't read too much into one night." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt an unexpected wave of sadness, not for myself, but for how often women are taught to doubt their own clarity. I'm not reading into it, I'm listening to it. The waiter returned with the check, placing it between us. My date reached for it automatically. "I've got it," he said. "I know." Then I reached into my bag and placed my card on the table anyway. That finally shifted something. He paused, fingers still on the leather folder. "You don't have to." "I want to," I said, calm, grounded. It wasn't about the money. It was about closing the night on my own terms. The waiter nodded, unfazed. New York has seen every version of this moment. As we stood, there was an awkward beat, one of those small human pauses where people wait to see what the other will do. Hug, handshake, nothing. I offered a smile, polite, real. "Take care," I said. "You too," he answered, still processing. I stepped outside into the night air, the noise of the city wrapping around me immediately. Cars, voices, footsteps moving in every direction. The cool air hit my face, and I took a deeper breath than I had all evening. No rush, no regret, no second guessing, just relief. As I walked down the block, blending back into the rhythm of the city, I realized something that felt quietly profound. The date hadn't ended badly. It had ended honestly, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I walked a few blocks before I realized how light my body felt. Not relieved in a dramatic way, not euphoric, just lighter, like I'd put something down that I'd been carrying longer than I realized. New York kept moving around me the way it always does. A couple arguing on the corner, someone laughing into their phone, a delivery bike cutting through traffic like it had somewhere urgent to be. Life didn't pause for my clarity, and I didn't need it to. I thought about how many dates I'd stayed on longer than I wanted to, how many conversations I'd stretched past their expiration date because I didn't want to seem rude or difficult or ungrateful, how often I'd explained myself, softened my needs, edited my discomfort into something more palatable. That night, I hadn't done any of that. And it wasn't because I'd finally learned the perfect thing to say, it was because I'd learned when not to say anything at all. There's a lie women hear over and over, especially as we get older, that being chosen matters more than choosing, that if someone shows interest, we should be flexible, accommodating, grateful, that wanting to be seen fully is asking for too much. But sitting on that date, watching someone move through the evening without ever checking in, I understood something clearly. At this stage of life, respect shows up in the small moments. It shows up in pauses, in questions, in noticing. Anyone can be confident, not everyone is curious, and curiosity is where connection lives. That night didn't make me sad because it failed. It made me sad because it reminded me how easy it is to disappear when you're too willing to adapt, how quickly silence can turn into self-erasure if you're not paying attention. But it also reminded me of something else, something hopeful, that clarity doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a wine bar on a random weeknight, when someone orders for you without asking, and you realize you don't have to raise your voice to leave. You don't have to teach, you don't have to convince, you don't have to wait for a bigger reason. You're allowed to choose yourself the first time your body goes still. I blended back into the city that night, not invisible, not small, but whole, fully present in my own life again. And that, more than any successful date, felt like coming home.
If this story resonated with you, the next one is already on your screen. Click to keep watching and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories like this.